as David did, but I'm talking about mind spectrums. You missed him. He looks like this.
I'm sorry I missed him.
He was great. What's in back here is the electromagnetic spectrum. Over here is the low side, which is low radio waves, high radio waves, microwaves. Light is just a very small part, what our eyes can see, a very small part of that spectrum. Then there's ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma rays. There's a lot of electromagnetic waves that you can't see. It's a spectrum. Now, in fact, there is no division. There's 1 million. So he talked about physical spectrums, spectrums of wavelengths, of energy, of matter, of space and time. I'm going to talk about thinking about the concept of spectrum. Forget what that's a spectrum of, the concept of spectrum. For example, the concept of evolution was a purely biological concept. But nowadays you hear about the things called the evolution of the computer, the evolution of kindness. It's become a part, the word has changed to become a part of our language, of how things unfold over time. It's more than history, it's the idea that something evolves and becomes more complex. So too, the concept of spectrum can be applied to the mind. It's a tool. It's a tool for the mind. And paper is a tool. A computer is a tool. The idea that you can actually write, as I've given some lectures on this, is a tool. Most people over most of history had no idea that you could represent language in two-dimensional space and preserve it. Language was elusive. It moved away from you. The idea of spectrums replaces the either-or thinking that we were raised with. This is a cat, that's a dog. This is a tiger, that's a lion. You know there's such a thing as a liger? You don't start that with 4-year-olds because they're just trying to get the contrasts, lion or tiger. And so it's a tool to say, wait, there's lots of in-betweens. 87.3% of people, I make up numbers, don't think this way. Think about the gradient in between. You could call it a range, you could call it a gradient, you could call it a continuum. What makes it a spectrum, what makes a continuum, which is continuous and has no differentiation, a spectrum, is that when there are parts of the spectrum that are identical, like this is yellow and that's orange, then it becomes a spectrum. Different regions have their own names. In fact, there is no essential difference between an invisible infrared ray and a visible red ray, except that the wavelengths are a little bit shorter. There is a rare condition that some few women can pick up more red, and they can see that their kids have a fever. Nobody else can see it because their eyes pick up more red. What they've found is that when you look at stars, which are all little bright stuff, is that if you really look up close and you look with a spectrometer, you notice that some stars are more bluish and some stars are more reddish and some stars are more yellowish. Our sun is that red dot in the middle. It's not really red, it's mainly yellowish, as you ask any 4-year-old who's drawing a picture of the sun. Lots of yellow. But in fact, it's so bright that you don't see it. In fact, the stars operate on a spectrum. And the more blue is a higher wavelength. It's a brighter star. They tend to be bigger. And because of all that gravity, they tend to burn faster. So they're hotter, which gives them the blue color. And you see about that when you heat up a piece of iron and it turns red hot, and then it changes from red to white hot, which is kind of bluish. But this is still the coloring of real things. Another spectrum of part of the real things is how loud. Everything is too loud nowadays. Music has gone up about 2 decibels a year in my calculations, which means it's gotten so loud that it's hard to listen to and go to a band, for me. And I'm a little deaf. But it's something that can be measured. So I'm going to come back again and again to rephrase the take-home. It's a mental tool, thinking that you can break things down and think about shades of gray. I'm afraid to talk about shades of gray because it's become a naughty book. A perfectly good idea. But then again, what is a computer, ladies and gentlemen? A computer in 1944 is a person, usually female, who does mathematics, arithmetic all day long. Somebody said, you could do this with a machine and do it a lot faster, and it became a machine. But originally, a computer was a person. It was a job. What do? I'm a computer. What did I just do? I ended the slideshow. Page down. Excuse me. All right. All right. I'm giving you a clue. What's the whole story? I pressed the wrong thing. Okay. You have to learn how to press the right things nowadays. Okay, so those were objective. Sound, color. Mind spectrums. Honey, how mad are you? People don't talk that way. You're mad or you're not mad. You're happy or you're not happy. What happens if marriage couples begin to quantify how much they like or dislike something? If they begin to say, you know, I kind of don't want to go visit your cousin 1+. And she says, all right, I don't care. Or she says, no, this is really important. This is a whole family thing. This is 3+ that you go visit. And if you're a healthy marriage, one says, if it's that important to you, I'll go and I'll be cheerful. Right. You got a 3+, I got a 1+ the other way. I can change. Talking this way, talking about the spectrums, is a really useful tool for resolving problems if you're not into a power trip of one has to win. If you really care for the other person, you're going to say, okay. So mind spectrums is a very useful tool. This is a cartoon I did, and the point about this is that most of these things are what my son talked about. They're fast or they're slow. They're small or they're large. They vibrate fast, slow, or fast. They have a lot of heat, or they have very little heat and very much heat. What's this? We'll talk. These two categories I'll come back to, because they're trying to kill me. What are we talking about? Okay, let's talk about the visual one. Only mind notices that some things are more complex than others. The problem with this is that it seems like these are actual things, but there are in-between categories, so that some molecules are so big, and I'll talk about this with protozoa, they're so big that they're actually cell components. That means that it's a continuum. It's a continual thing. Where do you say it's a cell component? Where is it a molecule? It's not always clear. Ladies and gentlemen, half your kids don't have this clear in their mind. Boundaries are arbitrary. There are languages where there are not all the colors that we see. They are really red, white, black, and that's it. They don't have a lot of colors because information is a difference that makes a difference. And if it's not relevant, why are we bothering naming it? So we say something is red, but if you're an interior decorator, you have 18 to 27 names for red, because it matters that you say this is a little bit more magenta and this is a little bit more red-orange, and it's red, lady. You passed a red light. All I need to know is that's red, that's yellow, and you get a ticket. So it depends on what level of in. So, but mind can discern different levels of complexity and organization. And we get to live halfway between atoms, which are really tiny, and galaxies and galactic clusters, which are really big. It's quite an honor. Have you ever realized it? You're right in the middle. Wow.
How do we know that?
Huh?
How do we know we are?
We don't know anything.
No, I mean, you're saying...
No, we don't know anything. I mean, pretty much we don't know anything.
Yeah.
I mean that. I mean, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom. I'll show you what I mean.
I'm going to get there.
Because I thought I'd throw this in. This is afterwards. So we live in what we call a three-dimensional universe of space and a one dimension of time. Last year, they discovered the Higgs boson, which is a condensation of the Higgs field. Ask me what it is. I don't know. It's a theoretical something that gives mass to us. We don't need any mass. I got enough mass, thank you. I need to go on a diet. No, you don't understand. Nothing would have any mass without the Higgs field. I don't know what that means. I do have a theory, and the theory is something that was science fiction, which I read a lot. It's not science fiction anymore. People are really seriously, scientists are seriously talking about other dimensions. What? Other dimensions? They're talking about the water that we live in. Now, I happen to know that there are other dimensions, okay? Because I come from one of them. When people say you're not all there, they're right. No, what if actually mind, we're talking about mind, everybody lives in their own mind world, which you sometimes suspected because people are really weird compared to you. What is it? Everybody is mad except thee and me. And sometimes I wonder about thee. Okay, so the idea that we are pretty what are we doing? You're going to have some fun with this class. So things are more complex. The other thing is I talked about this in another class. There's a kind of world that we all learned about called the geosphere. It's inanimate stuff, chairs. And then we learned that there's this stuff called life, which is more conscious and it's more spontaneous. And I'll be talking about that in the last lecture about one-celled animals. How could there be life? And then there's this complexification that is not quantifiable. It's a mind spectrum called, sometimes I'm more intelligent than a one-celled animal. Sometimes I'm not. The noosphere, nuo meaning knowing. And sometimes people say the theosphere, which is there's more going on here than just me being smart. And that's what the mystics touch into. The key point is there's a spectrum of consciousness. And I've talked about this in some other lectures. And several pioneers in mystical psychology, religion, and psychology are talking about you can raise your consciousness. When you wake up, you raise your consciousness. When you transcend your selfishness and you say, you know, I really care about how you feel, you're expanding your consciousness. Not much, but a little bit. So it's a spectrum of consciousness. So these are tools. And the thing about mental spectrums is that everybody's different. There's not a right amount for you and you. And many of you have been married, and many of you have known that there's no exact right temperature.